Hello everybody, Incon here. Today we're going to be talking about our top 10 tips to help you get better at Deadlock. Now these are not going to be specific things that you should be doing, but rather general ideas to help you get better at the game that are going to be incorporating multiple subjects. And also this is going to be the first in our series of a lot, hopefully, of helpful Deadlock content for you. We're going to be talking hero guides eventually, tier lists, top 10 tips, all that kind of good stuff to help you guys get better at Deadlock alongside the gameplay videos. Tip number 10 here for Deadlock is that farm is king. A lot of people initially when they start playing Deadlock start playing it like it is a straight hero shooter. You're playing it like it's Overwatch, and then all of a sudden you're getting wrecked and you don't know why. The reason why you're getting wrecked is because you're not prioritizing the farm. It is a MOBA first, and so you do need to make sure that you're getting as many souls as humanly possible. Typically, the way you're going to prioritize it is you're going to prioritize the wave over all other sources of farm. Laning gives you so much experience in this game, and then you've got the jungle and you've got boxes. Now, if you can do the high level jungle camps, those are very, very efficient for farm. Otherwise, boxes are actually more efficient than the lower tier camps for a lot of characters. So unless you're a character like a Seven or a McGinnis who can start farming those tier 3 camps right away, make sure you find a couple of good box farm paths, whether they be under the ground, on the ceiling, on the level. Any way that you can go get boxes is a great way, especially because the boxes typically also come with the golden statues, which are permanent buffs, which play a huge long-term benefit in the Deadlock matches. Tip number 9, and I know this one's gonna seem like I'm a teacher giving you homework, but make sure you go through and read every character's abilities and their level ups. Now, this is gonna take a lot of time if you're like playing your very first game of Deadlock, but particularly for the characters that you wanna play, start to play a variety of characters, and before you get in game with them, not only read all of their abilities, but read all of their level ups as well, because that's gonna be very important in the long term for knowing characters' power spikes and stuff. Because you're going to be able to associate a certain time of the game with a general soul level, meaning that you're always going to kind of have the vibe of what people are doing, even without directly taking time to go look at their characters, look at their builds and all that stuff. You're going to be able to see it right away because you're going to have a better idea of where you are at in the match farm-wise. Tip number 8, and this is huge for new players, is have your build at the ready. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to do your own custom build because you're trying to learn how to build characters on your own. Fantastic. Doesn't matter whether you're using a pre-built, you're trying to use one of our builds that we've used before, so you're typing in Incon to grab yourself a build. All good. The reason why it's so important to have the build at the ready is new players, and even players that have been playing for a while, will spend a lot of time sitting at the store, and any time in Deadlock that you're not farming is essentially wasted time. There's always something to be doing, whether it's getting the lane minions, the boxes, the jungle camps, rotating for a gank, whatever it is. Any second is a second that you can be using in this game. There really is no downtime. So you have to have that build at the ready. So that way you're like, oh, I've got 500 souls. Boom, I buy my item. I've got 1250 souls. Boom, I buy my item. If you can eliminate spending 10, 20, 30 seconds in the store, which a lot of people will at first, it's going to help you so much in the farm, which is going to help you so much throughout all stages of the game. Tip number 7, this one is going to be off the back of reading different characters' abilities, but it's also going to be incorporating a little bit more game knowledge once you get used to it, which is know your character's power spikes. Now, this is massive for the laning phase as well, because knowing characters' power spikes will let you know when you should be playing aggressively against other opponents and also how your matchups are going to go. So, for example, if you're a character like Hayes, you're going to have an absolute living nightmare hell of a time in the laning phase most of the time. She is simply not an early game character. That is not her power spike. But once you start getting a couple of auto attacks items online, then you're going to be able to start getting those fixation stacks a lot faster. You're going to be able to start rotating. You're going to be able to start getting kills. So knowing that Hayes is a late game character and that she starts to come online around the mid game compared to somebody like a Mo, who you're going to be able to AFK, don't even have to think about the laning phase, you're gonna win it, but then later in the game you're gonna have to use a little bit more brain power and you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful. Those kind of things are massive knowledge, and that's gonna come with knowing every single character in the game, which means you gotta read their abilities. I know, more homework. Tip number 6 is knowing when to rotate. So right off the bat, the big minute marker is the 8-minute marker. That is the time when you're going to start to see a lot of people start to rotate. The reason why is up until the 8-minute marker, the duo lanes are getting the same amount of souls as the solo lanes. So up until that point, you're basically getting 100% split. And then after that point, you actually do start to split those souls and it becomes less efficient. So because of that, you're going to start to see a lot of people rotate around that 8-minute marker. Now, that does not mean you have to rotate at the 8-minute marker, and it does not mean that you cannot split XP. But that is the time that you should start expecting people to rotate. And that is when you should start mentally, if you're in those dual lanes, start to think about, okay, we just cleared the wave. I'm going to go rotate and gank one of the solo lanes. Obviously, if you're in green lane, it's easier to gank yellow. And if you are in blue lane, it is easier to gank purple. But keep that in mind. Right around that time is when you can start looking around for ganks a little bit earlier in order to make your solo lanes win, which will allow them to push, get those guardians down, get you some flex slots. Tip number 5, Deadlock is all about the movement, so you need to know various movement tech. Now, the normal movement tech in this game is not that difficult. You simply shift and then spacebar at the end of your shift, and that is going to be your dash jump. You're going to see this used for the majority of movement throughout the game, and it is the standard thing that you need to get used to. Once you get used to that, you're going to start incorporating slides as well. If you're going downstairs, you almost always want to slide. 1, it is a little bit faster, but 2, when you are sliding, you also have unlimited ammo. So if you can combine the slide, jump into another slide, you start to get a lot of movement off of that. You start to combine that with items like kinetic dash, which give you an extra stamina slot after your dash jump, because it isn't actually consuming one. You start to combine that with wall jump tech, where if you jump off a wall into a wall and then push yourself in the other direction by pressing the opposing movement key, you will actually jump off of a wall and not use a piece of stamina. Once you start to get all of that different movement tech down, you're going to find that your game gets a lot easier, because not only are you traveling further, but it makes getting away so much easier. Even if you're trying to run away, you can be shooting at the same time that you're sliding away, which is massive. Tip number 4, play the objectives. So there's really a couple of massive objectives in the game. One is getting those guardians down, because if you get a couple of guardians down, you do go ahead and unlock the first flex slot. You have 12 item slots, up to 16 once you get them all unlocked. And the reason why those flex slots are so important is that they can be any kind of item compared to the previous 12 slots, which are locked into having to be one of the 3 item types. So once you get those guardians down, you of course have the walkers. Same kind of thing will unlock you another item slot. Knowing when to push those is important. Right around that 14-minute marker is when the walker becomes way easier to kill. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to push the walker before that time, it might be a little bit more difficult. Then, of course, we have the Urn and the mid-boss. The Urn is probably the most underutilized objective in the game. It's actually not that difficult to get a lot of the time, especially if your team is losing. If your team is losing, the Urn turn-in will actually be further on your side of the map, and it's actually incredibly difficult to contest the Urn when it is like that, and it'll basically even up the game for you. So keep an eye on your souls, because if you get around that 10% marker down, you're going to have a free Urn turn-in. And then, of course, the mid-boss. Now, everybody knows about the mid-boss, but the thing about it is it's also pretty easy to steal. So when you're doing the mid-boss, you need to keep an eye on enemy composition as well as yours. Characters like Ivy and Grey Talon and Dynamo, big AoE CCs, you have to be very careful of, because it's actually very easy for them to go in, use, say, the owl from Grey Talon to stun everybody, and then somebody comes in and free punches. So keep an eye on those compositions. But that mid buff, which does scale as you kill it multiple times, gives you a self buff. It also buffs your minions, and it makes it much easier to get those pushes in, of course, because you get that additional faster res, which means dying isn't that big of a deal. Now for our top 3 tips, and these are really the most important tips that I think new players need to know. Number 3, early game isn't everything. Earlier we talked about how Haze gets super wrecked in the early game. Can't tell you how many games of Haze that I have played where I got absolutely decimated in the early game, but then I come online and I get a key assassination, and then we have a 6v5 and we win the game. You need to keep yourself calm throughout the early game, especially if you're falling behind. If you know the matchups throughout the game, if you know your characters, if you know all the different heroes, you're going to have a better time knowing when your character should be coming online. But the most important thing is to not get frustrated in the early game. And as with all MOBAs, I've always said, sometimes you just got to put your head down and farm. You can let your team know in comms, hey, I got wrecked in the early game. They're going to be rotating around the map a lot. I need to focus on my farming so I can get online and help us. It is okay. You are going to lose the early game time and time again, and especially depending on the heroes that you prefer to play. Some of them pretty much lose the early game every time, and all you're trying to do is go even, and going even is your win. And so having all of that knowledge at your disposal is huge for not getting frustrated and playing into your hero strengths. Tip number 2, active items are nuts. When a lot of people start playing Deadlock, they are inclined to go for the big stat sticks. Big stat sticks are fantastic. I ain't got nothing against them, all right? You're gonna build a lot of them because you've got upwards of 16 item slots if you've got all of your flexes unlocked. But getting yourself a couple of active items early will be a game changer for you, especially depending on the character that you're playing. Somebody like a Warden, getting slowing Hex online ASAP basically means that they can't use any of their movement abilities, which means oftentimes they're going to be stuck in your 3, which means the slowing Hex to stop their movement ends up rooting them, and if you get rooted by Warden, you are in fact dead. So keep an eye out for all of those items, whether it's a healing right to sustain through the early game, a slowing Hex to stop a Vindicta from flying in the air, a knockdown to get Grey Talon after he's in the air, a metal skin to completely stop Haze from being a character. Those items are game changers, and while you don't need to buy 4 active items on every single character in every single game, you should be buying active items every single game on every single character. And if you find yourself without at least a couple of active items by the end of the game, your build probably needs to be changed. And finally, our number 1 tip, and this is really gonna blow people's minds that have played a lot of MOBAs, which is sometimes and oftentimes dying is better than backing. So in a lot of traditional MOBAs, if you get low, you back to base and then you come back, and that is just what you do. In Deadlock, that's actually not really the case throughout the early game. In the later stages of the game, it is. Once your death timers start getting long, because then if you die, it means that they get a mid-boss, it means that they get an extra flex slot, they push your base, etc. That's a problem. But in the ultra early stages of the game, if you're down to a couple hundred HP, you're almost always better off trying to stick around and find the farm that you can instead of backing. If you back all the way to the base and you don't have the zip boost you're gonna actually miss so much experience. And the death timers on the respawn are so low in the early game, it might be 3, 4, 5 seconds, which is actually a faster amount of time than it would take you to just take the zip all the way back to base pretty significantly, which means you miss out on less total farm if you were to actually die instead. Obviously, if you can buy a healing right or something and full heal up and not die, that's preferential. But get in the habit of the early game of never backing to the base if you can. If you have to go somewhere, if you don't have your shop or something, try to rotate over to the mid shop, do something like that. But in the ultra early stages of the game, you almost never want to back. It almost always leads to a farm loss. So whether you're going to go quickly try to grab a jungle camp, a couple boxes, whatever, or even just take the fight in lane to get some poke damage off on your opponent, so that way when you come back with full HP, you've got a fight advantage. Those are almost all better options than going back to the base with a slow zip. Thank you for supporting the Twitchiest community. If you'd like to see more videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel and always hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Thank you for all your support and have a Twitchin' day, y'all.